and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Sharon Van Sickle-Robbins, president of City Club, and I would like to welcome all of you, those of you here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening to us on OPB or KVPS radio or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Thank you for joining City Club today on March 4th for this week's Friday Forum. In consideration of those sitting close to you and those in our radio and television audiences, would everyone please make sure your cell phones are silenced? Today, Governor John Kitzhaber kicks off City Club's series on restoring Oregon's fiscal health. But first, a few announcements. I'd like to thank our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine. I'd also like to offer our appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors whose generous financial support makes these luncheons possible. We'd like to thank winter quarter sponsor Stoll Reeves, and our other two winter quarter sponsors, the Standard and West Coast Bank, are here with us today. So if our sponsor tables could rise, we'd like to offer you our most sincere appreciation. They don't have to be alone. If your company or firm would like to sponsor City Club, please contact City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club offices. We also have some special guests at the back of the room. We have the government classes from Thomas Edison High School, and I'd like to have us all give them a big welcome. City Club offers lots of opportunities to listen to a wide range of voices, to learn about the issues challenging our communities, and to join other citizens in finding solutions and making a difference. Today, on the first day of our spring membership drive, we encourage all of you who aren't members to join City Club and support our mission of building better citizens. Now through the end of April, City Club will waive the $25 new member fee for each person who joins. And if you join today, we will also deduct the cost of the lunch that you've just eaten, a total savings of $45. City Club staff will be available to help you become a member at the back of the room where you registered after the forum. There really is no better time to join than today. And finally, before we begin our program, you may have noticed that there's a cryptic chart in the center of your tables, and the governor assures me that it will all become clear shortly. And now to our program for today. Governor John Kitzhaber kicks off City Club's premier issue series, From Crisis to Opportunity, Exploring Solutions to Oregon's Fiscal Challenges. This series will challenge conventional political wisdom and explore innovative and long-term solutions to Oregon's fiscal crisis. It is part of City Club's broader strategic planning efforts, which involve coordinating our programs and research to have a greater impact on local and state policy issues. City Club is not alone in seeking solutions to Oregon's fiscal crisis. In his short time in office, Governor Kitzhaber has called for fundamental changes in how the state provides health care, education, and other vital services. He has called for a new health care delivery system, a comprehensive 0 to 20 approach to education, new policies for creating family wage jobs, and has asked that legislators quickly approve his proposed budget. Today, the governor will lay out his vision for a fiscally sound future for the state and will call every Oregonian to action. Without further ado, please help me welcome Governor John Kitzhaber.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate the City Club inviting me here today. And I'd like to start by asking you to think back to those times a little over a decade ago. Imagine for a moment it's 1995. Our tech stocks are bubbling along enthusiastically. Pearl Jam CDs are flying off the shelf. I'm standing in front of you in a pair of Levi's, and you're still eating the same chicken and fish at the Governor Hotel. That was a very important time. The 1990s were the culmination of a long legacy of innovation, a rich tradition of civic participation, and all the rewards of an economy that produced 120,000 jobs and an increase in wages at 48%. But that was yesterday. Ahead of us lies a series of unprecedented challenges that threaten our future prosperity, an unemployment rate that hovers stubbornly around 10%, a growing discrepancy between state revenues and the cost of public services, and a disturbing pattern of disinvestment in our general fund. The demand for public services is increasing because of an aging population and because of the recession, people needing the health plan, people needing public support, while public resources are shrinking, not just because of the high unemployment rate, but also because the per capita income in this region has been eroding over the last decade. And the public services that we do have are increasingly being spent on corrections and health care and the human consequences of abuse and neglect and addiction, while the money we're investing in educating our kids and producing a more stable economy is decreasing. And that trend is accelerating. I think most of us approach this challenge with the belief that we want to try to get back where we were before, where we were a decade ago. And many of our politics and policies are built on the premise that we want to get back to the world we knew before the collapse of our financial markets in 2008. I want to tell you today that that is the last place we want to go. That is the last place we want to go. Because embedded in this crisis are a set of tremendous opportunities. But to realize those opportunities, we've got to change. We have to change ourselves, and we have to change our assumptions in order to change the future. We simply can't go back to where we were in the past. Because the good economy masks the fact that the underlying systems on which we rely are based on assumptions that are simply no longer valid. Getting the private sector economy going again, as important as that is, will not by itself reverse the pattern of disinvestment in our general fund. Putting Oregonians back to work again, as important as that is, will not by itself reduce our prison population or the cost of health care. It will not increase the number of children who are ready to learn when they get to school or the number of high school graduates that go on to get post-secondary education or training. And the reason is very simple, although perhaps not obvious. The systems on which we rely to provide these important public services are failing us. They're based on a set of assumptions that are no longer valid in the 21st century, and no amount of money or investment will change that. We need to change the systems themselves. So securing our future requires two things. First and foremost, it requires getting the private sector economy going again. But secondly, and of equal importance, it requires redesigning the systems through which we deliver important public services, particularly in education and in health care. So let's start first with the economy, where I think we've already taken a number of very important steps. First and foremost, let me say again that Oregon is open for business. The state of Oregon is open for business. My first act as governor was to launch a number of immediate job creation action items, and I'm glad to report that we've made good progress on all of them. Today, we can announce that we have created over 6,500 jobs already this year. Companies like Solo Power, U.S. Geothermal, Vigor Industries are announcing new Oregon plants and acquisitions, jobs, and capital investments. More evidence that the recovery is underway. And today we can announce that Shimadzu USA has decided to make a significant commitment to Oregon, expanding its operations in Canby with over 50 high-wage jobs over the next 3 years producing analytic instruments. And this expansion also requires building a new 54,000 square foot manufacturing facility employing more family wage workers down in the Canby region. I've proposed $19 million in lottery funds for direct public investment through the Oregon Innovation Council, which has helped Oregon companies become more sustainable and competitive. And this initiative helped create and retain about 1,200 jobs over the last 2 years. But the budget goes further with additional investments to support programs like our Infrastructure Financing Authority, the Oregon Office of Film and Video, and the Governor's Strategic Reserve Fund. I've also started the process to make Cool Schools a reality. Cool Schools is our statewide, multi-phase effort to improve energy efficiency in public school buildings. This initiative will create good family-wage jobs throughout the state of Oregon, putting the building trades back to work, removing asbestos and making classrooms safer, and reducing the energy costs in our system of public education. I'm also pursuing legislation that will create a preference for biomass boilers, which will allow these schools to replace inefficient fossil fuel-based heating with a renewable resource that will also help spur our biomass energy industry in rural Oregon. We've also taken some important steps to make sure that our workforce is ready to be on the job. On January 25th, I launched our statewide availability of the Oregon Career Readiness Certificate, which is a national program that provides objective documentation of an individual's foundational job skills. And I've included $3.4 million for on-the-job training in my budget, which is expected to connect 1,325 Oregon workers to high-demand jobs in the next year. I'm also very, very encouraged by the optimism and the resilience of the Oregon companies that I've visited over the last few months, from Hill Meat Company in Pendleton to Select Onion in Ontario to the manufacturers here in the Portland metropolitan area. And finally, this past Sunday, Governor Gregoire and I met in Washington, D.C. with Transportation Secretary LaHood to discuss the Columbia River Crossing project. And I'm glad to report that I believe this state has the opportunity to get all the project approvals this year, to complete engineering next year, and to break ground in 2013. Replacing the interstate bridge is crucially important for a number of reasons: for addressing congestion and safety issues on Interstate 5, extending light rail across to Vancouver, building better pedestrian and bike connections between our two states. In addition, the region's economy will clearly benefit with the creation of up to 20,000 direct and indirect jobs and through improved freight mobility. Now, I acknowledge that this project is not without controversy, but I believe that we can and will end up building a bridge that all of us can be proud of. Yet, his words were met with a smattering of applause. I'll try it again. Even as we begin to seriously lean into the challenge of job creation and economic development, we need to recognize that changing our pattern of disinvestment to secure a sustainable and prosperous future requires not just change, but transformational change in the way we provide public services, particularly for education and healthcare. And to make that point, I want to offer an analogy by comparing the systems through which we provide important public services with the development of a successful organization, let's say a business. Now, most successful businesses start with an environment in which investment produces growth and prosperity. But as the environment in which the business operates begins to change, if the business doesn't create a new business model that reflects the new realities, not the old, the growth of the business begins to taper off and then gradually decline. So General Motors would be the example of a company that failed to learn this lesson. It continued to build big gas-guzzling cars in the face of high gasoline prices and concern over global climate change. Now, a successful business, when it recognizes that the world is beginning to change, that the circumstances are beginning to change, creates a new business model based on the new circumstances rather than the old one, which results in a new growth curve, right? Now, the problem is that for a short period of time, the new model and the old model have to coexist. And the area between the new business model and the old has been called the area of paradox. And that's an area where there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of churning. People are nervous. They recognize that what they're doing isn't working for them anymore, but it's familiar. And they're afraid to let go of the old model because they don't know what the future holds. I would submit to you that this is exactly where we are in the United States and in the state of Oregon, in education, in healthcare, in our approach to energy policy, transportation policy, in economic development, and in the way we seek to manage our natural resources. The point is, we need a new business model. We need a new way of delivering public services that reflects the realities of 2011, not the realities of 1995. Now, obviously, we can't transform all these systems at once, but we have to start with education and healthcare, and we have to do it now. And I have put proposals before the legislature to do exactly that. And I want to emphasize here, I want to make sure that you clearly understand that making these changes and transforming these systems is absolutely essential. It's essential for our long-term economic recovery. It's essential for building the workforce of the 21st century. It's essential for raising our per capita income back up above the national average. In short, making these changes and making these transformations is essential to building a secure and prosperous future. But ironically, making these changes is probably going to be a lot harder than putting people back to work, because clinging to the familiar, clinging to the old ways of doing things is human nature. Reaching for the possible requires an act of faith. It's not unlike the ropes game. If any of you have been to outdoor school, they put you up on a post 10 feet above the ground with a rope that you're holding onto, and off over here is another post and another rope. You're supposed to get from one post to the other. And the only way you can do it is to lean out and for a moment let go of the old rope in order to grab the new one. The old rope are the old systems, the old business model. The new rope is what we have to create and build. So to be clear, the opportunity here, our moment in time, and quite frankly, the leadership challenge involved is to be able to describe the new systems, to describe the new business models, if you will, in healthcare and in education, in a way that people can see them and believe in them and let go of the past in order to embrace them. So to make that leap of faith, and surely we have to make it, requires imagination, it requires a willingness to challenge our assumptions, and it requires a strong sense of community. And I believe that we can see and reach that new rope in education and in healthcare. So let's start with education. The transformational change that I've proposed for the system of public education in Oregon was developed by 3 transition teams, some of the members of which are here today. Early childhood, led by Lynn Saxon and Pam Curtis. K-12 education, led by Ron Saxton and Nancy Golden, who is the former superintendent of schools in Springfield until I stole her away to be my education policy advisor. And post-secondary education, which is led by Duncan Wise, and by Mary Spilday, the president of Lane Community College. Now, broadly defined, education from early childhood through post-secondary education accounts for over 50% of our general fund budget. And yet the budget framework through which we allocate these resources views early childhood investments, K through 12, community colleges, and higher education as separate competing entities rather than a part of an interdependent continuum. So currently, the budget for the Oregon University system is created by the Board of Higher Education in a silo over here. The budget for community colleges is created by the State Board of Education in another silo. The K through 12 distribution formula is locked in statute, and dozens of early childhood programs are scattered across 6 different agencies. These isolated education budgets pass through the legislative process utterly unconnected with one another, and funding is based largely on enrollment, which means that the health of our schools and colleges and universities, to a great extent, depends on how many students are enrolled, not necessarily how well those students are being served. So the budgeting system, as well as the incentives within it, have got to be fundamentally changed if Oregon hopes to meet its long-term educational and economic objectives. And the fact is, we don't need to wait for more money to begin to invest in the future. Our current fragmented budget and allocation process needs to be replaced by a unified, transparent 0 through 20 education budget, and the funding mechanism needs to be shifted from enrollment-based funding of institutions to outcomes-based funding of the success of students as they move along the continuum. And it all starts with ensuring early childhood success. Investing early is the key. It's the foundation to make sure that all of our children are ready to learn when they get to school, are ready to read when they get into the first grade, and are reading when they get out of the first grade. Every year in our state, about 45,000 children are born. 40% of them, 40%, are exposed to one or more well-recognized socioeconomic, physical, or relational risk factors that disadvantages them and puts them at a loss in terms of taking advantage of the educational experience. These risk factors occur in the home and in the community. They include teen pregnancy, they include poverty, unstable family relationships, negative peer associations, involvement in the criminal justice system, substance abuse. Today, we're spending over $1 billion a biennium on programs for kids 0 through 5, through a whole range of public, private, not-for-profit programs and services. But we are unable to track a child across these programs. We are unable to track results. The programs and services don't work in concert with one another, and in many cases, they're utterly disconnected from the K through 12 system. In short, the billion-dollar system through which we're trying to give kids the right start in life is neither accountable nor integrated. So I have set a number of very ambitious but very achievable goals to revamp our early childhood system. First, within 2 years, we plan to serve 60,000 children, which is a 50% increase. Second, within 2 years, at least 70% of the children who are served will meet kindergarten and first grade benchmarks by 2020. And third, the average cost per child will be reduced 30% to about $5,200 per child. Now, in addition to early childhood changes, we need new approaches, new business models, if you will, to the K through 12 system and to post-secondary education as well. As 15 school superintendents pointed out in a recent Oregonian editorial, and I quote, "It should not be hard to let go of the status quo in education, limping from funding crisis to funding crisis with a system that does not deliver for students, bleeds resources away from teachers, and leaves Oregon behind," unquote. The State Board of Education and the budgetary functions of the Board of Higher Education should be replaced with an Oregon Education Investment Board that would have the responsibility of developing the unified, transparent education budget and for developing performance expectations along the entire continuum. Now, if that sounds like a lot, well, it is. But it is also absolutely essential. And to illustrate the problem we're trying to address here, let me offer another analogy. Much to the chagrin of my late mother, I was once a student pilot. Now, to earn your pilot's license, you have to be able to pass a written test, but you also have to be able to apply that knowledge so you can land the plane. I remember walking into my office after completing my written test. I got 98%, and Bob Applegate, who was my press secretary at the time, said, "Well, what part did you flunk? How to land the plane?" The point here is that in getting your pilot's license, some people can do that in 80 hours. For some people, it takes 150 hours. So the variable is the amount of time it takes you to achieve the mastery, to be a safe and competent pilot. The constant is the mastery itself. It's the knowledge that you've learned and can actually apply in a real-life situation. In our current system of public education, that's just backwards. The constant is seat time, the amount of time you spend in primary and secondary education, 13 years, kindergarten through 12th grade. The variable is what you learn and your ability to apply that in the real world. That's one of the reasons that 20% of our community college capacity is taken up with remedial education. Students learning or relearning things that they should have learned on the way to getting a high school diploma. We have to let go of the old rope in order to seize the new one. But as we begin to take on the challenges of reforming and transforming our system of public education, it's very important for us to pause a moment and recognize the people who have been on the front lines of the education system. those teachers and administrators who have consistently been asked to do more with less, or less with more maybe. Wouldn't that be nice? Many of whom, regardless of the system that they're in, go the extra mile day in and day out. We've all heard the stories and the circumstances that exist in our public school system today. Books that are outdated, the shrinking of the school year, crowded classrooms. Mike Lamb, who's a high school teacher in Klamath Falls, wrote me a letter recently about his classroom, which is so crowded that he can't physically get the students sitting in the last 2 rows, which means personalized attention, which we all know is really important, doesn't exist in the back of Mike Lamb's classroom. But despite the overcrowding, he has served the science students at Mazama High School very, very well. Many of them have gone on to college. None of them have been required to retake science courses because all of them earned their advanced chemistry credentials in his crowded classroom. My point is that it's very, very important in these difficult times that we recognize and thank our educators, the people in our public schools, for doing a tremendous job under very, very difficult circumstances. And I'm absolutely convinced that the only way we can get them the resources they need and deserve is by revisiting the system as a whole, by working with teachers and administrators, researchers, parents, child advocates, and the business community to craft a common solution. Not a solution for a few districts for 2 years, a solution for Oregon for a decade. Now, even if we are successful, or maybe I should say when we're successful, transforming our system of public education, our ability to adequately fund it will be compromised unless we can reduce the cost of health care. Health care is now the single fastest growing cost in state government, both from the standpoint of our responsibilities to low-income citizens and vulnerable citizens through the Oregon Health Plan, but also in terms of our responsibility as a large employer. Health care is becoming increasingly affordable for individuals and families and private sector businesses. We cannot allow health care to continue to increase 9 or 10% a year, because if we do, it will continue to bleed money away from wages for workers, from education, and our common social infrastructure. So let me be very clear. The problem here is not how we pay for health care. The problem is what we're buying, and whether what we're buying is actually producing health at a cost we can afford. We know, for example, that 30 to 40% of the cost of health care can be attributed to inefficiency, to duplication, and to ineffective or unnecessary care. We know that over 80% of the cost in the health care system comes from treating individuals with one or more chronic illnesses like congestive heart failure or asthma. We also know that 10% of the population drives 70% of the health care costs. As my son would say, well, duh. If we had a system that could identify and appropriately manage the 10%, if we could shift the focus from after-the-fact acute care interventions to wellness and prevention and the community-based management of chronic conditions, we'd have a system that we could dramatically reduce costs while improving the health of the population. And let me give you an example. Let's suppose there's a 92-year-old woman living somewhere in southeast Portland in a small, unair-conditioned apartment, and she's got well-managed, stable congestive heart failure. And the temperature, we have a heat wave, and the temperature in her apartment goes up to 105 degrees for a day or two. That increased temperature will put enough strain on her heart to give her full-blown congestive heart failure. Under the system we have in place in Oregon and in America today, we won't know about her until she shows up in the ER manual. Under a more rational system, a home health worker would be checking on her on a regular basis to make sure she's okay. Under our current system that we have in Oregon and in the United States today, Medicare will pay for the ambulance and the $50,000 to stabilize her in the hospital. It won't pay for a $200 window air conditioner, which is all she needs to stay in home and out of the acute care system in the first place. That makes no sense as a business model, and it certainly makes no sense as a way to improve the health of the population. So what I am putting before the legislature is a rather bold proposal that directly addresses this problem in a way that will improve the health of the population at a lower cost while improving the patient experience. Starting with the 500,000 people who are on the Oregon Health Plan, this proposal would better integrate care, it would regionalize care and accountability for cost and outcomes, and it would shift the focus from after-the-fact acute care interventions to wellness and prevention and the appropriate community-based management of chronic conditions. Now, unlike the short-sighted decisions that many other states have made to simply drop Medicaid recipients from coverage, we are taking a different path because there is nothing to gain and a whole lot to lose by just dropping people from coverage and forcing them into the ER, where we end up paying for someone's stroke in the hospital rather than managing their blood pressure at home and in the community. But, like the transformational change we're seeking to make in public education, transforming the healthcare system is not going to be easy. It too is going to require courage, it's going to require imagination, and it's going to require a strong sense of community. And already some of the stakeholders are beginning to dig in, beginning to resist this transformation, clinging desperately to the status quo in the hopes that somehow the economy or the federal government or maybe the tooth fairy is going to make a fundamentally flawed and dysfunctional system work. Clinging to the belief that it makes sense to continue to pour money into a system that produces population health statistics just marginally better than Cuba's. We have to let go of the old rope if we're going to grab the new one. We're on the downside of the growth curve here. It's time, in fact, it is way past time, that we design a new system that reflects a new set of realities, because clinging to the healthcare system we have is going to take us over the falls, which, by the way, is not a bad analogy. Let's imagine that our healthcare system is a raft on a river, and in that raft are all the stakeholders a party to the healthcare debate. You've got uninsured people, you've got workers with good coverage, you've got seniors on Medicare, you've got business people, doctors, hospitals, folks that own nursing homes, insurance companies. We're all in there. And we've all got our stakeholder paddles. And we're floating down the river, and all of a sudden, the river disappears. And we can hear this rumbling, ominous rumbling, and see mist rising from where the river used to be. And what do we do once we can clearly see the danger? Well, we turn our backs to the danger, and we grab our stakeholder paddles even tighter till our knuckles are white, and we start laboring mightily, trying to keep our end of the raft upstream, deriving some perverse sense of security that the people on the other end are going to go over before we do. We can do better. We can do better. But to do better, to succeed in this endeavor, we have got to do it together by respecting each other and by restoring our sense of community. We cannot and will not allow the challenges we face in the months ahead to tear our state apart. And a most hopeful sign to date is the positive tone that's been set in Salem. And I want to commend President Courtney and Speaker Hanna and Speaker Roblin for their leadership in this regard. I believe that our state is finally beginning to gain a collective understanding that Oregon's success depends on our willingness to pull together and to develop new partnerships and new coalitions. Let me also say that this state will not go down the road that Wisconsin has chosen. We are not going to go there. I have made it clear that I expect our public employees, including those in our system of public education, to make some concessions to help us through this current fiscal challenge, including contributing to the cost of their own health care, including helping to absorb the cost of the increased employer contribution to the PERS system. But those concessions are going to be made across the bargaining table in the context of our collective bargaining law, and it's going to be done with mutual respect. We're not going to solve our budget challenge. We're not going to make the changes we need in education and healthcare by attacking the labor movement or by seeking to make scapegoats out of our public employees. I would remind you that the labor movement helped create the middle class in the last century, and it will play a very pivotal role in driving per capita income back upwards in this century. Public employees public employees are our neighbors, our colleagues, our families, and our friends. None of this is going to be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, and we shouldn't underestimate the magnitude of the challenges we face, but we should never for a minute doubt our ability to successfully meet them. Oregonians are a great and resilient people. We've faced tough times before, and we can do it again. During my campaign and during my inauguration, I said that somewhere in America, the state needs to be able to demonstrate that we can weather this kind of challenge without losing our sense of community, without losing our commitment to one another, and emerge stronger and more united than when we began. That is a path we've started down. We're already reaching for that new rope. I'm asking you to join me in letting go of the old one. Thank you very much.
Before we begin questions today, I just wanted to let everyone know that usually you have to be a City Club member to be able to ask a question of our speakers. And today we have a huge audience, a lot of whom I'm sure are planning to become members but haven't done it yet. And so I want to open it up for everybody to be able to come and ask questions if they have them. So you can start to think about your questions. If you've never done this before, we have a mic over here that people come and line up for, and then we take as many as we can during the time we have. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host. And our host today is City Club Governor Sue Thomas. A City Club member since 1998, Sue is co-founder of Avatar, Inc., an organizational development consulting firm that specializes in strategic planning, organizational change, and cross-sector partnership building. She is City Club's immediate past president. Sue?
So having been an Outward Bound instructor in my earlier days, I was very much struck by your ropes course analogy and could very much relate to it. I think there's going to be a very different challenge between the public letting go of that rope and the state bureaucracy letting go of that rope. So I'm curious as to where you see the biggest challenge for both of those sectors, and what's your role in providing leadership to allow that to happen?
So the question, if I understand it, is my role in bringing the public to realize they need to let go of the rope, but also the bureaucracy. So I think the challenge, and I want to say I think this is a shared leadership challenge between the public sector and the private sector. We have to be able to describe what the new role looks like, what the new business plan looks like, and convince people that holding on to what's familiar is not getting us where we want to go. And I think the evidence to support that is all around us and mounting. But it's still an act of faith. And so we need strong, bold, courageous voices in the public sector, in the private sector, labor, business, to begin to support making this shift systems. And we're going to do the very best job we can down in Salem trying to describe what these new models look like. In terms of the bureaucracy, I think that's a real challenge. And that's one of the reasons that I hired Mike Jordan. Where is Mike? Is Mike back there? There's Mike. We've created a new position, the Chief Operating Officer, and this is to essentially bring new, consistent business and management practices across state government, develop a new, essentially zero-based budgeting process, a performance-based budgeting process. We're working with Jim Pyro is heading a group that's actually trying to develop a 10-year budget framework. So again, like the other systems that we have, the systems in which our public employees work are inhibiting talented, gifted, dedicated people from reaching their full potential. So there's an outside strategy that involves all of us. There's an inside strategy that involves changing the systems through which we manage and operate state government.
We will now take questions from the floor. As I mentioned, we're going to open it up to everybody today. If you are a City Club member, please identify yourself when you ask your question. Please ask your questions in 30 seconds or less. If I hold up my question mark sign, it means that we don't know what the question is and we want to hear it soon. Thanks.
You're going to hold one of those up if you don't know what the answer is, too?
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier the Columbia River Crossing project, and I have a question about that. Lynn Parsons, I'm sorry, City Club member. You and Governor Gregoire, it's been recommended to you from your departments of transportation that you consider the composite deck bridge style, and there's a groundswell of support from those who are expert bridge review panel members for a cable-stayed bridge. We're wondering that would potentially get the project underway faster, under construction faster due to fewer piers, and also that there would be fewer environmental risks. We're wondering what other information, what organizations will you turn to as you make this decision?
Well, we have, first of all, the panel of bridge experts that suggested that the open web design raised some serious questions about risk and expense, and we then shifted, and they gave us three other options, which were, as you mentioned, the tide arch, the cable stay, and the deck truss. We asked for an expedited sort of review of those by the DOTs, by WashDOT and ODOT, and they came back and recommended the deck truss. Now, we have a process where we're engaging the public. There'll be public hearings. I'm going to be meeting with a group of key individuals from urban designers to people who have different views of this to get their input. So we do have a process involved. We're not going to drag it out for a long time. This has been going on for 5 years, and we have to make a decision. But here are the criteria that I think both Governor Gregoire and I are interested in. Affordability. We have in the middle of a recession here, let's remember, and this is an expensive project. We have to be able to pay for it. One that allows us to stay on the projected schedule. One that adheres to current environmental commitments, builds on the resources that we've spent to date, has the least impact on the river, whether or not it will attract multiple contractors giving us the best prices, provides the overall least risky path forward, and aesthetics is an important component as well. So we're going to take the input, and then we're going to make a decision based on these factors, and when we make the decision, we're going to move forward. And I'm sure that no matter what the decision is, there will be someone in this room or in this state who doesn't like it. But the leadership challenge here is to address a chronic problem. This discussion of a bridge started when I was governor before with Gary Locke. And surely we should be able to get this one off our to-do list and move on to other things.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. No. Wait. I am sorry, but I have to bring up the same subject again. We want you to succeed. I want you to succeed. And it's only on that Columbia River crossing that we have some problem. You need a new road in transportation. You talked about essential change. The Columbia River crossing so far is in the past. You look at the future and you know it's going to be different. Rail, particularly in our country, is going to be totally different. For freight, for passengers, we're talking about high speed. Light rail is going to be one part, but we need long-distance rail. And there is a bridge on the Columbia River that needs to be changed. It's over 100 years old, and it's supposed to carry eventually the high-speed rail. So all I'm saying is look outside of our country. Look to Canada, look to Europe, look to Japan, China, India. Everybody is investing in rail. Are you ready? Are we ready?
Surely there's a question in there somewhere, right? So the answer, we just heard very recently that the governor of Florida has successfully given back $2 billion to the Secretary of Transportation. We've talked to Secretary LaHood about this, about getting some of those resources into the Northwest Pacific Rail Corridor. And Lynn Peterson, who will be coming onto my staff, will be riding point on this, and we are very optimistic that we're going to be able to get some additional resources into rail here in Oregon and in the Northwest.
Paul Milius, City Club member. I'd like to address another drain on the public purse. In an editorial on February 18th, the Seattle Times stated, "Marijuana should be legalized, regulated, and taxed. The push to repeal federal prohibition should come from the states, and it should begin with the state of Washington." It went on to cite Washington's positive experience with medical marijuana and Seattle's tolerant enforcement policy. They report that public reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. Our research board recently considered a study on marijuana use, regulation, taxation, and so on, decided other priorities precluded it, but the issue is not going to go away. Do you personally support the Times editorial stance, and would you support such a study by the City Club that would address issues such as regulation and taxation?
Well, if the City Club wants to study marijuana taxation, I think they should certainly be able to do it. This is America, after all. My personal position is I do not support the broad legalization of marijuana. I am a great advocate of medical use of medical marijuana. I voted for the very first bill back in the day for glaucoma and for nausea associated with chemotherapy. I'm willing to entertain expanding that to other legitimate medical uses, and if there is a issue in accessing timely access of medical marijuana, I would certainly support that, but I don't support the legalization of the drug.
Mary Vogel, Congress for the New Urbanism Cascadia chapter. Word on the street is that the unemployment rate for architects, engineers, and planners is about 45%, not the 10% that in the rest of the population. While I really appreciate your workforce training, it seems that we need to keep that infrastructure we have of architects, engineers, and planners to build the kind of transit-oriented development that our Gen X and Gen Y are demanding, to build the 20-minute neighborhoods that we need for a sustainable future. And yet it's going to go away because the banks, the Wall Street banks, are not loaning for development, for any kind of real estate now. I wonder, do you have any kind of plan or solution to get us off the dime?
Well, I don't have an easy silver bullet, but there are a couple things that we're looking at. The treasurer quite recently loosened up capitalization requirements for some community banks that has made more capital available for lending here in Oregon. The Cool Schools initiative, if you will, is essentially creating some design opportunities and certainly some good trades jobs retrofitting those schools. And we are working with the utilities and some other folks to try to develop a second-tier sort of financing mechanism for these energy efficiency projects by beginning to treat a kilowatt of energy conserved in the same way as a kilowatt generated, so that PGE, for example, could meet part of their RPS by conservation rather than new generation. And the idea is to take the opportunity for these large-scale energy efficiency projects, not just to public buildings, but to commercial and residential buildings and industrial buildings as well. And it seems to me that that is the shortest way to begin to get some serious money back into the construction industry, and we plan to make that a very, very high priority over the next couple of years.
Sandra McDonough with the Portland Business Alliance. Governor, an issue that is brewing in Salem and starting to get a lot of attention now is the question of reconnecting the state tax code with the federal tax code. And I'm wondering where you are on that and where you hope to see the discussion go in Salem.
Well, my budget was actually predicated on the assumption that we were connected. The fact that I ran again suggests that maybe I'm not. There are obviously some legitimate issues involved here. My concern, though, is that it looks like the issues are going to be resolved through press releases by the different caucuses. And I have asked Speaker Roblin and Speaker Hanna to slow down the showdown on the floor on the minority report, to move that on the calendar, next Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, to give us a time to sit down together and see if we can figure out a way to resolve this issue without unspooling the session here in the first month. My concern, and I'm not, there are legitimate issues on both sides, but I don't think anybody has thought past the first move. And I think we need to sit down and ask ourselves where this is going to go and how we resolve this issue in a way that keeps the conversation civil and doesn't polarize the building for some much, much larger issues that we're going to have to address here in the next 2 to 3 months.
Chris Andre, City Club member and KBOO board member. You have a lot of support in this room and across the state, and it's wonderful to see that. I'm looking at the diagram. That is something to think about, and the part of it I'm thinking the most about is the area of paradox. When you talk about moving on and abandoning the way we did things in the past and catching the new rope, it's hard for me, and my question is going to be, how do you factor in biomass in schools? That's essentially putting a wood stove in a classroom. If we could have these wonderful, extraordinary, high-tech industries in Canby that employ lots of people, why are we basically keeping the timber industry on life support? We've already whacked down 90% of our forests. Can we afford to start tapping into what is in effect the last of our natural capital?
So the question is, why are we keeping the timber industry on life support? I'm asking because it's hard to hear.
Why are we using biomass when there's so many other better ideas out there?
Okay, why are we using biomass when there's so many better ideas out there? There are many good ideas out there. Biomass, in my view, is one of them. I have spent a lot of time in the natural resource parts of the state. I lived in Douglas County for many, many years. The fact is that some of our large public forests are in very, very bad shape. There are tinder boxes, and some active, environmentally responsible thinning treatments are essential to keep those forests healthy, to preserve the carbon sequestration value that they have. And a byproduct of that is biomass, which I think, at least to date, the EPA has ruled has a carbon beneficial profile, is an opportunity to make the wood products industry a sunrise industry, not a sunset industry. But, if I may, I guess I can't take my mic back over there, the old paradigm for a wood products industry in the Northwest, when I was down in Douglas County, involved cutting 600-year-old logs, up on the Umpqua, 1 log per truck. We're not going back there. But the fact is there are huge opportunities, ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, woody biomass, that create a wonderful nexus between a green, clean economy, supporting a natural resource industry, and creating jobs in Oregon. I think those are the kinds of opportunities that we have to look at. Nobody is supporting going back to the old logging paradigms of the 70s or 80s or 90s. But I think there's an opportunity there that can actually bring us together and achieve multiple public objectives at the same time.
Carol Turner, City Club member. This goes back to the first question where you described the role, your role and the leadership role in terms of describing the specifics enough that people can let go and reach out. Even though we all know specifically the public education system has enormous challenges and in many ways is broken. So if we make 2 assumptions that your task force on early childhood would do a phenomenal job and our children will come in better prepared, and we'll make the assumption that the schools will be more environmentally healthy. Could you give some specifics about what you think will be different for the children of our state in the K-12 system? What will look different about them, say, in the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, we are going to acknowledge in word and deed and in structure and funding that education begins almost at birth. Because in many ways, we act as though kids don't exist until they get to kindergarten. We're spending $1 billion a biennium in the middle of a recession with 10% unemployment on an early childhood system that is leaving almost half our kids behind. So the first thing is that kids, if we lean into this and if we make this investment over the next 3-4 biennia, we'll have a generation of kids coming into the schools ready to learn without the achievement gap. That reduces remediation costs, that reduces counseling costs, and it also addresses the huge racial and ethnic disparity in opportunity in this state, because we know that in communities of color, these risk factors are much more dramatically manifested. And those kids are really disadvantaged coming into the school system. So we will address that with this early front-end investment. Secondly, we are going to have a system based more on proficiency rather than simply testing to a grade, demonstrating that children actually have mastered the topics that they need, and if you fail a test, you keep working on it until you pass. I ran into a woman in Medford who told me that her teacher told her that her 5th grade son was actually reading at the 3rd grade level, and her obvious question was, well, why is he in the 5th grade? Proficiency-based learning, we want to, and I believe that the opportunity to recapitalizing our education system, which is underfunded at all levels, is to basically create a much more transparent process that shows Oregonians a much more direct relationship between the dollars they invest in the school system and the outcomes we're producing for students. I guess the other place is we need to blur the distinction. We need to look at 11 through 14. We have kids who should be earning and getting college credits while they're in high school, and I think the big leverage opportunities are 0 through 5 and probably 11 through 14. And it's going to be a system that honors and supports and celebrates the hardworking men and women who work in public education.
Kurt Wavering, member. As governor, I'm sure you're being reminded time and again when you deal with budgets about our clumsy, constraining tax resources to pay for our government, the kicker, the lack of a sales tax. I'm not proposing either one of those, but can I hear from you what you would do to change our rather archaic and constraining revenue sources?
The Oregon tax code, which is not dissimilar to probably the federal tax code, was developed over many, many years with things added and not many taken away. And it wasn't really designed around sort of the long-term convergence with what we want to happen economically and socially and in terms of stability. So I think the first step is I do support modifying the kicker. I believe that we need to create a very robust savings account, if you will, with tight controls that gives us the capacity that most responsible families and businesses have. You sock money away in good times so that you can actually spend it during bad times. So stabilization of our existing tax system through kicker reform, I think, is very, very important. Because it's in the Constitution now, that will require a political coalition that engages and re-engages the people who were fighting with each other over 66 and 67. But if we're able to successfully do that, then I think we've got a coalition that can actually take on the larger question of, does it still make sense for Oregon to rely almost solely on personal and corporate income taxes to finance its public enterprise? And I think that's if we can do the kicker within the next 2 years, then I think the next step is to have that larger debate about rethinking the entire tax system in the state of Oregon.